welcome. I'm Renuka Kirpalani. I'm Executive Editor, Video Content at Autocar India. And today's a very interesting day. We're going to have an interesting conversation because this is about the I-PACE that's all set to enter India now. The I-PACE was one of the first all-electric SUVs to be made by a premium automaker, and it was quite the rage. It went on to win accolades, I think, world over. It won World Car of the Year in 2019. It won European Car of the Year. It's won Green Awards, Design Awards. So yes, this is a car that has been hugely celebrated, and now it's coming to India. There's a lot that goes into building a car that goes on to become the World Car of the Year. And we're going to have a conversation with Mike Cross, a vehicle integrity engineer for the I-PACE. And that involves making sure that the Jaguar has all the inherent DNA that a Jaguar needs to have. And that's Mike's job. So Mike, we're going to have this conversation with you. I remember driving the I-PACE way back in 2018. And, us automotive journalists were always, EV, it's not going to be that much fun. And we were all set to be completely bored by this vehicle. And I remember you guys had set up a fantastic course for us in Portugal, and we drove it in the dirt and we drove it everywhere. And you guys had asked us not to rip it to save the battery, but all of us couldn't resist because it handles so well. And it actually felt thrilling to drive. And, hats off to you, because that's a large part of your job. First, let's dive into the question about Jaguar Land Rover dynamics. I mean, these are sharp handling cars world over. Everybody loves the way Jaguar cars handle. What goes into it?
Well, I think Jaguars, they're great looking cars. They have performance and they have great vehicle dynamics. And what we try to do is make the car feel intuitive, so you don't have to learn how the car responds. So there's an immediacy to the responses, but the car's never too sharp. So it manages to be relaxed and comfortable and yet responsive and dynamic. It's this dual character that we try to put into the cars.
But it's always, there's so many things that go into making a car, and, it is a black art to be able to get the ride and the handling so perfect. And there's always a fight, between design and engineering, and then to get the balance and the handling, it's a lot that goes into it. So how do you fine tune this, and how do you get the cars to be cars that, excite everyone and still have the comfort that they have?
Well, we try to objectively define our DNA for vehicle dynamics. And what I mean by that is we can define in engineering terms how the car should behave. We can model that behaviour, and that allows us to get a head start when we're developing the car. But still, the fine-tuning, the polishing of the car, if you like, is done subjectively by experienced engineers.
But and how much of that, these days so much is done by computer simulation and, working behind the scenes, but how much of that is actually people like you and the engineers getting into the car and, by the seat of your pants, that feel that actually comes when you get behind the wheel of a car?
Well, as I say, the more we can do in the virtual world, the more time we can save. But the ultimate fine-tuning of the car is still done by experienced vehicle dynamics engineers on the test track and on the public road.
So what was your experience when it was the I-PACE? You've been all along, you've been doing internal combustion engines, nose heavy, and this was a completely different ball game. With motors at 2 axles, you had a different weight balance. So what was your experience with the setup of the I-PACE?
Well, I think, like you, initially I was sceptical about an electric vehicle because I think a lot of the vehicle's character comes from its engine.
That's right.
And I was concerned that if you took that away, it would be harder to differentiate between cars from different manufacturers. But then we thought about it and we decided we'd try and make the car behave like any other Jaguar, albeit with a with a different power unit. The architecture of the car, though, gave us some advantages. So the weight distribution is very good. The weight distribution is close to 50-50. And the mass of the car, the weight of the car, is low down as well, all of which help vehicle dynamics. So we then realised we've got a great opportunity because an electric vehicle is extremely responsive. And we soon learned really that the car could be fun to drive. So we tried to give it the steering and ride and handling of our other vehicles, albeit in an electric vehicle. And I'm actually very pleased with the outcome. The car has exceeded our expectations because clearly still is a Jaguar with respect to its ride and handling and responsiveness. But it has all the benefits of an electric vehicle.
So you make the sound like everything was all easy and everything kind of fell into place. And I'm quite sure it wasn't like that. There were a lot of challenges. What was the biggest challenge for you?
I think the biggest challenge was to make the performance of the car in the overall sense feel intuitive and natural.
Yeah.
And electric vehicles, because of their batteries really, are comparatively heavy. So we needed to, and although the I-PACE is one of the lighter electric vehicles, so we needed to almost disguise that mass. And we did that through the weight of the controls and the responsiveness of the car. So I know it's a cliche, but the car feels lighter than it actually is. And that was done by steering response, response to the accelerator, response to the brakes. All those things gave a very natural, intuitive feeling car.
It did, absolutely. I agree with you. Like I said, I was quite blown away when I first drove the car. And I think all of us got into it and said, this is the first EV we've driven that actually we feel like getting back behind the wheel and driving all over again. And then a lot of us gave it a good go because we were enjoying that drive. You also have that instant torque to deal with, that gets put down immediately. And you have to counter that with the handling and making sure that, there's a balance between fun to drive and, being safe. So how did that balance work out?
Well, the response of the motors and the way that's tuned to the accelerator pedal was an important part of the development of the car. So we wanted to keep that response, but never have the driver feel overwhelmed by it. And it's important with a Jaguar, I think, that the car has good performance, feels very responsive, but it needs to be smooth and easy to control as well. So a Jaguar almost has two characters. It needs to be invigorating, but it also needs to not be demanding to drive. So, it was a balance of the control weights and the control responses, and then making sure all those responses were harmonious with one another was the key to developing the car, really.
Yeah. And with the I-PACE, I think you never had that problem that most SUVs have of being top heavy because you had a really good low CG to begin with the battery being down low. So was that a big advantage in, the basis of the setup? Because you did speak about that earlier as well.
Yeah, the architecture of the car is an advantage. So the car is comparatively low, the weight of the car is down low, and the body structure is stiff, all of which make tuning the car more straightforward.
Yeah. And, we're talking about Jaguar cars and we're talking about this DNA, but what do you think it is that sets you all apart, that makes you all crack this code probably a little better than some of the other manufacturers? And why is it like that? I mean, we all know everybody wants it, but somehow you guys managed to crack this code between ride and handling really well. And it's one of the comments that most automotive journalists give, that, the Jaguar's got the greatest balance between ride and handling. And how do you get that?
I think the most important attribute, I think, is probably steering, because that's the one part of a car that you use all the time. And even if you're not a steering expert, if the steering is good, it gives you confidence in the car. And I think that confidence makes you enjoy driving it. So I think the first thing we try and resolve is the steering, so that the steering feels connected. There's no free play in the steering, but neither is the car nervous or overly responsive. And then we work on the ride. So the ride needs to have enough control, but it has that relaxed, easy feeling, as almost as if the car is breathing. So it's not tied down, so it follows the road abruptly, but smoothly irons out the road surface. And I think that's based on knowledge and experience of ride frequencies, suspension design, suspension travel. And we spend a lot of time on tuning the shock absorbers, the dampers. So that's the key, I think.
And then that also, like, I mean, for the Indian market, it's a whole different ball game on ride as compared to anywhere else in the world. So it's a bunch of different kind of setups you have to have. And is that part of what happens when you design the vehicle? Do you realize that, okay, this is going to go to so many markets and we need to have these various setups, or do you fine tune it along the way as you enter each market? And how much of the testing on ground in each market do you do?
Well, I think we have experience of the Indian market from other cars in our range. I do think, as an overall trend, the character of the cars around the world is becoming similar. I think maybe 20 years ago, cars were more different. And often wheels and tyres and wheel and tyre size varies around different markets, perhaps more than suspension tuning does. So I think we have experience of all the different markets. We do evaluate the cars in different markets, but overall, as a character, we tend to largely tune the cars the same for all markets.
And
I think to your points earlier, you've enjoyed the dynamic character of the car, and I think people enjoy that around the world.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, like you said, while we do change tire sizes for India, the I-PACE had quite a set of larger tires. You had, I think, 19-inch on them. And was that a bit of a challenge to set up ride quality on larger wheels?
Yeah, I think we have 19s, 20s, and 22s. What we tend to do is we do the tuning on the tyre size that will be the most common, that most cars will be sold on. And then we overcheck the tyres. We overcheck the car on the outliers. So there's usually a wheel in the middle that most cars are sold on. There's a smaller size sometimes and a larger size. And then we check the car on those sizes. And whilst we're tuning those tyres, we try and give the car similar behaviour to the most common size. So that's how we deal with that.
And, you were speaking about a large part of the Jaguar DNA being, in tuning the steering. And
Yes.
for one, I completely agree, because when I get behind the wheel, I like a meatier steering. I like something that gives me a bit of fight back. But it's a hard balance to get that between and still have it light enough for the everyday driver. And I think that is something you guys have got down to pat. There's someone like me who will be equally happy with the steering, and your everyday guy who wants to park the car will be equally happy. And how do you fine tune? Is a lot of it on electronics? How do you finally get that balance? And what is, I'd love to know how that gets done.
Well, I think in developing steering, firstly, you've got to get the basics of the car right. So the suspension design and the kinematic behaviour of the suspension. But lots of other factors on the car influence steering. The rear suspension, surprisingly, has a huge influence on steering, but also the way the tyres and the shock absorbers are tuned. So I don't believe steering should be heavy per se. As you said, the car doesn't need to be difficult to drive or too challenging to drive. The key, I think, is to getting consistent and smooth response and no feeling of free play in the steering. So again, based on other cars we've made, we have a good feel, I think, for what steering torque, what levels of steering torque at the steering wheel feel good, feel natural, and we've tried to make the I-PACE feel like our other cars. So we have a common steering effort for parking. We have pretty consistent driving efforts. As a car gets more sporty, steering might get a little bit heavier, but I think it's based on our other cars. And, over the years, we've built up a feeling for what customers like.
Great. So when like you said, that's something that's happened over a period of time. Over a period of years, you got used to what your customers like, and that was always with internal combustion engines. So this was an entirely new learning curve. So was the development time a lot longer with the I-PACE? Did you, get in there and say, okay, this is like now starting from scratch? Or was there a lot of the learning that actually fitted in and then could be taken a level further, or was there a large difference?
Well, most of our cars, in fact, I think all of our cars have had electric power steering now for some years. So in terms of the steering, it wasn't so different. We probably spent most of our time in the tuning sense on tuning the response of the accelerator to make the electric machine feel easy and natural to control. The steering was comparatively straightforward because the steering hardware is the same as our other cars. We knew what the car was going to weigh. The suspension design is similar to our other cars. So actually, the steering itself was comparatively straightforward to resolve. Okay. So, we have a car that has all the Jaguar behaviours, but instead of an internal combustion engine, it has two electric machines. Those electric machines have improved weight distribution, and you can control the front and rear electric motor individually to give you the handling response that you require. So the steering itself was comparatively straightforward, actually.
Yeah, I remember during the presentation you said it was, a large part of the decision to have two electric motors was also to maintain, the inherent Jaguar dynamics that yes. were a part. Yeah, so that was taken, although it builds costs and etc. But that was a decision taken to keep the DNA intact. Yeah. So having two motors does help the dynamics a lot more.
Yes, it does. I mean, it improves traction, it improves weight distribution, and it gives you some flexibility on how you could choose to have the front and rear motor respond differently, for instance, in corners. So it gives you more flexibility.
Definitely. And, during the setup of the I-PACE, were there any crazy moments or times you said, I can't do this. I have to go back to the drawing board. Any anecdotes you have about, the I-PACE in particular?
I think we were all very pleasantly surprised. Yeah, surprised how responsive the car was. So that was the standout thing. How fast it is from a standing start. So that was a great surprise. We worked hard on the tyres because we want low rolling resistance to maximise range, but we needed good dynamic performance to make the car feel like a Jaguar. So a lot of work went into tyre development, actually.
Yeah. So you have to work very closely with a tyre manufacturer on developing at the stage when you are building the car and sort of building the dynamics, and how long does that process take, actually getting that right? Because it's about, like you said, it's about compounds, it's about the tire walls. There's so much that needs to be decided in between,
yeah, I mean, we have a specific team that develops tyres, but at the start of a program, we would be in touch with the tyre manufacturers and we would define what we require the tyre to deliver. So we'd know the weight of the car, we'd know the rolling resistance we would like, we know what the tyre should weigh. We can give the tyre manufacturers the dynamic properties of the car. But I would think, I'd need to confirm this, but I would think the tyre development process was probably 18 months, 2 years, something like that.
Yeah. And how long did it actually, I mean, this entire setup of the dynamic, how long would you say that took you? Was it a larger time than you would normally take for the setup of another vehicle because this was all new?
I think the dynamic setup would be the same as our other cars. I think more time was spent on the electric machines, the control of those machines, the NVH of those machines. But the dynamics would probably be similar to one of our other vehicles. So my role is to guide the development of our cars with respect to their dynamic properties. So that's steering, ride and handling, NVH, drivability, anything that a customer would subjectively evaluate. And then there are key component teams that develop those systems, and the role of myself and my team is to integrate those systems so the car feels harmonious.
And I remember it was the first time we kind of experienced the various levels of being able to adjust the regen of the braking. So that would give us even more of a feel of driving a normal vehicle, especially when you're driving it quicker, and we could adjust the levels of regen. And, that sort of gave us the engine braking feel that sometimes you miss in an electric engine. So was that a large part of the development that your team also added input into?
Yeah, we tune the systems on the car, the regen, the brakes, the accelerator, to feel intuitive and easy, so you quickly get used to them. And I think with the regen turned on, you can, by good anticipation, you very rarely need to use the brakes.
It was like we were told, I remember, single pedal driving, and none of us kind of believed it. So we drove. I remember in Portugal, you had this nice dirt track, and a lot of us went through it with a single pedal and the regen on, and we were pretty amazed with it. So that was a large part of getting that feeling into the car, of making it feel almost close to driving, like shifting the gears down, for example, and that gave us the feeling, which I think was a large part of it. So was that a big decision, and was that a big play in costs and things that you had to decide to add this in, and how did that work?
I mean, what was quite challenging was integrating the feel of the brakes with the regen.
Yeah.
Because if you've got regen on, you rely solely on regen off, you rely solely on the brakes. If you've got regen on, you've got some deceleration from the regen, and then you add the brakes as well. So tuning those systems to be harmonious took some careful development. I always drive with the regen on, and it's quite rewarding, I think, through anticipation. You can actually drive the car quite smoothly and quite quickly, actually, without needing the brakes at all. And of course, you're maximising your range as well.
Exactly, yeah. It's been an absolute pleasure having this conversation with you. I'm sure you must be very, very proud of the I-PACE and, of course, all its achievements. We're looking forward to getting the car. And thanks for talking with us, Mike. And we hope to see you in India soon.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.